is from our latest annual report and business plan and highlights some of the work in and around the river, so including the flagship project, the Millennium Bridge, on the top row. And we can definitely provide a link to the full annual report and business plan as well. With last week's Earth Day highlighting that we need to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the mid-century to keep the global temperature below 1.5 degrees, it's crucial that CRP engages with the climate crisis, and we're determined to contribute to a greener and prosperous future through our environmental work, which Dave will be presenting more on as part of Clean Air Villages in this session. So with this in mind, I'd now like to pass over to Alistair Gale, who will give some context into the Thames Vision and the work that the PLA are doing on kind of the consultation for this vision. So over to you, Alistair.
Rachel, thank you very much. And I'm interested to see the results on who knows what Roro and Lolo means. So hello, folks. I'm really pleased to join you this afternoon. So this session is a reflection around sustainable cities reinventing the river. For us, it's a perfectly timed question, as we've been spending a lot of time looking at this recently, shaping an updated river development framework, Thames Vision 2050. I'm going to run through how the future is shaping up for us through the work we've been doing, but I'll start just by introducing the river and the PLA, if I may, because it's kind of familiar, but there may be some things that you don't immediately know. So at the Port of London Authority, we look after 95 miles of the tidal Thames, 150 kilometres for my planning colleagues who frown at me for using miles. The river runs through central London, from Teddington Lock out through central London to the North Sea, and it's home to the UK's biggest port, the busiest inland waterway for both passengers and freight, a growing hub for sporting activity, and numerous environmentally valued and designated sites. And just to touch on a couple of reasons why some of those characteristics are important. The port's important because it's the way that all of us in London and the Southeast get an awful lot of the food, the fuel, and the manufactured goods that we rely on. So it's very likely, if you had a cup of coffee this morning, that somewhere, if you chase back through its origins and the logistics that brought it to you, it will have come via the Port of London and terminals on the Thames. So I think maybe another reflection is just to say, in reality, the Thames changes in nature greatly from the deep end around Gravesend and out to the estuary to the shallow end. Let me just get rid of that. Sorry. And what we've been doing, so it's very much three rivers in one: a sporting river, a capital cities river, and a traditional estuarial port. So we've been developing Thames Vision 2050, looking at how to make the most of this amazing asset in the future through extensive study, taking in what is looking to be very rapid change indeed, which is influencing all our futures. And some of those include decarbonisation, climate change, both the management and mitigation of it, new technologies, new opportunities, especially in light freight. And I'll come back onto that shortly. One headline finding in the studies that we were looking at is that port trade, even though we are going to be in a very rapidly decarbonising economy, that port trade is still going to grow. And that's really important and very positive news, because the port is an economic powerhouse that is already sustaining over 40,000 jobs. Excuse me. So if I'd have the next slide, please. In planning for the future, this is just a brief list of some of the things we did. We did the port trade forecast, as I just mentioned. Quite importantly, at the very beginning of the process, we took a step back and we engaged with an expert panel of advisors, looking at not just what's happening in London, but what are the trends that are going to affect great river cities around the world. And that really helped inform the work that we did. So if I could have the next slide, please. After all of this extensive analysis and the stakeholder discussions, what we've ended up doing is drawing together a vision encompassing 3 main themes and 5 areas for action. So the themes are Trading Thames, which embraces the river both as a deep sea port, but also the inland freight aspect, which connects the city and the port. Destination Thames, which covers the passenger operations on the river and the sport and recreation, but very different from when we looked at this before, where we had specific targets for passenger travel. This time round, we've definitely flipped it on its head and said, why do people come to the river? They come because it's a destination. And that's, if you like, one of the overarching umbrellas we've chosen, rather than being very mechanical about river use. And the final aspect is Natural Thames. I already referenced the fact there are amazing and unique, in some cases, natural habitats on the Thames which are protected. So running across each of these areas are common themes for action. So safety, you would expect that from somebody who works for a port authority, but really ensuring people can safely access the river is fundamental to making sure people make the most of it and have confidence to make the most of it. The net zero transition is going to manifest itself not just in terms of the nature of the boats that operate on the river, but also the cargoes that come on the Thames. Until recent years, about 20% of trade on the river was fossil fuels, and we expect to see that drop over the coming years. Resilience, I've touched already on climate change, but this is also operational resilience, which we've had in very sharp relief over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic. Technological change, that again links back to the net zero aspect, but there is a lot of technological change in ship and port management systems. And then finally, and really importantly, access and inclusion. And I'll come back to access and inclusion in a minute. And I'm delighted to say, actually, that some of the speakers that are going to follow on from me are going to pick up on some of the things that are being worked on to make the most of the river in all of these various guises, in particular Illuminated River as part of Destination Thames and the work we're doing with Cross River Partnership on inland waterways freight. One word of almost caution, just a word of pause. Although this concept looks really beautifully simple and very with discrete themes and actions, in reality, it's anything but. It gets quite messy very quickly. If you're looking at new propulsion systems, that can touch on any aspect of safety, certainly touches on net zero, certainly touches on technological change. And also, to go back to my point on access and inclusion, we will need to draw on the very best talents to realize the most of the opportunities that we face for the future. And just to underline that, really, over the next 28 years, we're going to try to transform this economy from one which is fossil fuel based to one which is net zero carbon, which is really quite a challenge. So just to draw things to a close, go back to the beginning and turn the session title into a question. Is the river reinventing itself to play a central role in a sustainable city? Yes, it is. The vision reflects a very broad swathe of work that is set to be done. And that breadth is really important because we can't do it alone. It's not something for the PLA alone. We're working with partners like CRP, Illuminated River Foundation, and others to deliver it. Our role at the PLA is really to bring people together, to spark discussions, create the momentum to make the most of the river. Right now, we're just drawing to a conclusion on our consultation about Thames Vision. If you could just go to the next slide, please. That closes on Saturday, this Saturday at midday. If you want to find out more and have your say, just follow that that web link. And then the final thing really to say is why it matters. I think this picture of 3 young people who are either apprentices or recently certified apprentices with the PLA, I think it's really important that as we reinvent the river, we get it right. We have to create the opportunities for, and we need to engage the future generations who will take the running of this great river city on from us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alistair. Just to be clear, anyone can submit to that link, can't they, for the Thames Vision consultation? Oh, I think you're on mute, but I'm assuming.
We want to hear from as many people as possible. even if it's a very brief thought, just drop me an email and share it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation. And yes, whoever thinks row rows are chocolate in the Slido, we've got some great information that we could provide on river freight and things like that for the next few presentations. Okay, so as Alistair mentioned about Destination Thames, it's great to hear from you, Ciron, from the Illuminated River Foundation. So over to you.
Yeah, sorry, I moved slides. I didn't want to look at my face any longer. Thank you for inviting me along, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar names in the audience. So I'm sure you'll know this. I'm going to try and keep on focus on what I'm talking about. It's a massive project. There's lots to talk about, and I regularly talk for over an hour, so 10 minutes is going to be a bit of a challenge. Illuminated River, if you've not heard about it, is the longest public art project in the world. It is the first project to coherently and artistically light the bridges of central London. So far, at the moment, we have permission to light, planning permission to illuminate all 15 bridges from Tower Bridge in the east to Albert Bridge in the west. Currently, we lit the first 4 bridges in 2019. They are London, Cannon Street, Southwark Bridge, and Millennium. And last year, almost exactly a year ago, we lit the next 5. So now we have Waterloo, Golden Jubilee footbridges. I've just forgotten one, Blackfriars, and Westminster and Lambeth bridges. So we have arguably the main central portion of London. So it's a fantastic project. It's really complex. In 2017, on one day in 17 in May, we submitted 30 separate planning applications, 18 listed building applications across 7 London boroughs. Again, going back to the miles, this is, if all 15, when all 15 are lit, if they are, it'll count for 2.5 miles of continuous artwork along 5 nautical miles of the river. I'm going to try and keep focused on the actual subject of this afternoon, but first of all, I'll best make a nod to the artist. The artist was selected from an international design competition run in 2016. There was 105 entries. The winning entry was by Leo Villarreal, backed by London-based architects, Litchfields, Davidson, Sandilands, and loads of other consultants. He won for his approach to illuminating the bridges. Leo is a kinetic light artist, so the lights have a sense of motion about them. But what is very different about his particular artwork is it really focuses on the engineering and architectural beauty of the bridges, and it's something I'm going to continue to return back. So he's lit, and his process is lighting the structures and celebrating them as contextual piece of art. So although all the artwork covers is a coherent artwork piece, each bridge is its own piece of artwork. And I think interestingly, when you get talking to the artist about this, the art doesn't exist until it's actually on the bridge in the form of light. It doesn't exist as an animation or anything like that. It's actually very much only something that you have to go to the river and to experience. And I would encourage anybody that hasn't seen it to go down there and spend the time. To do all 9 bridges in an evening is quite a challenge. You probably need to spend 2 evenings doing it. But it is something that has to be experienced there in person. Part of his process of doing that as well is that it isn't a concept that he comes up with remotely and then just applies to it. He actually sits next to the bridges, and you can see him here if he's sat next to the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, actually painting with his algorithms, which are non-repeating, so it's forever changing, and fine-tuning certain different aspects. So before I will end up showing the artwork itself, but before that, I just want to try and remind you, because it's very hard when you have a change in the built environment like this, to remember what was there before. So first we're going to start with, admittedly, it's slightly poor photograph, but it does show the case in point. Westminster Bridge, although when it was first built, it had an element of illumination on it. In recent years, it was in total darkness, and with all of the surrounding lights, again, a theme that I'm going to come back onto, it was this kind of black void on the river. quite contrast to Waterloo Bridge, which was arguably lit by perhaps more of a utilitarian approach with very large floodlights illuminating the underside of it. And you can see it created quite a glare. And it wasn't at all kind of really creative or really celebrating the quite amazing, beautiful structure of this bridge. And thirdly, the example I want to give is London Bridge, which was illuminated as part of the London 2012 celebrations. But over time, the bulbs changed colour and burnt out, and it was actually this kind of orange colour when we came along and started to work on it. It's significant, and I'm starting with this one because it's a light project. We are putting light into the night sky. That does account for light pollution, and we are very aware that it also takes energy. And we've tried throughout the course of this project to manage the impacts and the negative impacts as much as possible. But before we began doing anything on the river, we did a few surveys to actually try to understand exactly what was there. So this is a view underneath London Bridge on a boat. Our lighting engineers were on a boat. They took their light sensors on a trip underneath and along the water all the way up the river. And what they were doing was measuring the incidence of the level of light shining directly into the water from any of the light sources around the river. And the reason why this is important is that direct light falling onto a body of water can impact on wildlife there. In extreme circumstances, it will create a barrier for migrating fish. Fish don't like going from dark to light, so they'll actually stay away from it. And it's a technique used elsewhere to actually kind of steer fish away from harmful dangers, turbines, and so on. So first of all, we created a baseline to actually understand what the levels were falling onto the river. This chart on the left-hand side, the peak on the left is Albert Bridge, and the topmost peak, the highest one, is London Bridge. So it's the second from the right. The furthest on the right is Tower Bridge. And as you can see, London Bridge was by far the worst offender. The low levels in the middle of obviously all the bridges that were not lit at that time. So they're quite low levels. But you can see London Bridge there. What you probably can't see is it's actually peaking out at 40 lux. To give you an idea of what 40 lux is, it's the same light level that you would light a motorway on. So it's extremely bright, an amount of light falling onto the river. So one of the key things that we were attempting to do was to actually reduce this and minimize it as much as possible. So this is a still of the artwork. And what you can see there is almost zero light falling directly onto the river. It was very carefully done. I could say there was some fantastic engineering and fantastic kind of techniques used, but essentially it was a lighting engineer up there bending a sheet of metal to make sure that it fell directly onto the bridge. What we managed to do with that bridge was illuminate it, create the artwork, create an artwork that is visible to everyone, and but has a reduction in light falling onto the river that is now less than 1 lux. So we reduced it by almost 40 lux. I'm just going to show another image because this actually shows a slightly different view of the bridge, and you can see light on the water. I just want to make the point that the way the artwork works is it's reflecting light back off the bridge, and so it's reducing the harm. So that's just reflected light, which doesn't have the same level of impact. The other survey that we did was we did effectively, you might like to think of it as a heat map for light. This is a view. So again, the engineers, they spent a couple of evenings or nights walking on the river with their calibrated cameras and taking photographs of the elevations of the bridges and the waterfront. This is a view of Albert Bridge. And the heat map shows you the level of light coming straight off the bridge into your eyes. The reason why this is important is that when you're trying to light an object, you're trying to create a level of contrast. So if you go to an art gallery, you'll notice the paintings are lit, and what the lighting designers there are trying to do is create a level of contrast between the light level falling on the painting and what's falling on the background, so that you see the artwork well, but it doesn't produce any glare and it's not overly bright. So again, like we did with the previous survey, we created a chart, and on the left you've got Albert Bridge, and on the right you've got Tower Bridge. But one I want to focus on, because I think this is leading on to a key aspect that we were trying to do with the project, is actually Southwark Bridge, which is one of the middling ones there. This is a photo of Southwark Bridge before we came along. Again, it was lit as part of London 2012. It was the lighting at that time was shone onto the bridge, and it reflected back quite strongly. The artwork now does a very different thing, which you'll see at the end when I get to the video. But what I actually want to highlight are the streetlights, or the lanterns, just above the bridge, those yellow dots going across the bridge, and their relationship to the dome of St. Paul's in the backdrop. What we noticed, what our engineers noticed, was that the Dome of St. Paul's is obviously an important landmark for London and for the nation, and is protected in many ways. But the nighttime sky doesn't have the same level of protection. And what we spotted was that the lanterns that were illuminating the footway and the highway, so they're doing a vital job, were actually competing with the light installation on the Dome of St. Paul's. So we raised this with the bridge owner, which is the City of London, the Bridge House Trust, and we talked to them about it, and they had already had plans in place for renewing the luminaires inside the lanterns, and we're going to be going LED technologies to reduce the energy consumption. So rather than just swap the fitting and create the same effect, they actually had a discussion internally, and they had a discussion with their conservation officers about how they could illuminate this properly and actually still create the same effect with the lanterns, which are part of the listed structure and are an important feature, but direct the lights more focused onto the footway and the highway, which obviously has safety concerns, and less into the eyes of people viewing that view of St. Paul's. And what if this then eventually led them onto, and so they have done that, they have changed it, but what this, there's the artwork there as well. But what this conversation led them onto, and one of the things that we're proud to have done with the project, is to spark a debate about light in the city. And the City of London took this on board and progressed a series of policy documents, planning policy documents, that explored light and explored their way that they wanted the City of London to be lit in the future. This is quite important and quite new, because the way buildings and streets are illuminated has never really been a proper consideration for the planning process. The illumination of advertising is, but the illumination of buildings as such arguably doesn't even require planning permission. So we think this is an important step change in the way the night sky is thought. And if you flick through these policy documents, it's actually quite interesting. The plan on the left there, they've actually, using their lighting engineers as major, they've actually come up with colour temperatures for the different streets, and have started to try to communicate the street hierarchy and the route hierarchy around the square mile related to the temperature colours of white. So white has cool temperatures of blue light, whereas something like the Tower of London is in a very warm light, it's in a candle light colour. They've also looked at the way the streets could be illuminated and different luminaires and how they could work. So I think it's absolutely fantastic and something that we're really proud to have helped. The last thing I'm going to, try and go back onto that. Hopefully you're not hearing the music. I'm just going to, for the last minute, just allow this video to play. This is our kind of promotional video, hopefully it's going to play, which just shows the 9 bridges and the artwork on them. As I said, please do go down and look at it. I can talk to you extensively about each of the bridges, the history of the bridges, the way the artist has interpreted it. This is the underside of Waterloo Bridge, something that I'd never noticed before I worked on the project. You can find lots of resources on our website, which is illuminatedriver.london, including guides to walking tours, paper guides, audio guides, and also on this video, hopefully you're not hearing at the moment, there's also a soundtrack. So we worked with the students of Guildhall School for Music, and they have created multiple tracks of music you can listen to, which has been inspired by the combination of the artwork and the bridges themselves. So I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much for I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ciron. Yes, amazing video. They look really beautiful, those bridges. Okay, Dave, I think you can take control now and we'll move on to you. But any questions, please put them through the chat and we will answer them after today's presentation. Thanks. Go for it, Dave.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. And hi, everyone. My name's Dave Ebbrell and I'm a project officer at Cross River Partnership. So today I'll be showcasing 3 new guidance documents that are all related to river freight. So they're Butler's Wharf and Dartford Pier Vessel Monitoring Report, Light Freight Design Solutions for Thames Freight Infrastructure, and Getting Started with River Freight, a guide for businesses. So these all form a part of CRP's Clean Air Villages 4 programme, which is a project funded by Defra, which brings together 26 partners from across London and the South East, all with the aim of improving air quality. So it builds on our previous Clean Air Villages 1, 2 and 3 projects and is going to lead into Clean Air Logistics London, a year-long project which begins in July of this year and focuses specifically on river freight. So there's 5 solutions focused on in CAV4. So they are consolidation, distribution, mode, technology and policy. The river freight projects in CAV4 fit into the context of many of the other aspects of the project. So these include things like zero emission last mile deliveries and also consolidation of goods. So before I introduce the river freight guidance documents, for a bit of context around freight in London and to highlight the need for alternatives to road freight, I'd like to begin by asking you a question. Just to make sure you're all still paying attention, of course. On the top right of your screen, you should see the Slido that it was on before. So on there is a question. According to Centre for London, how many parcels were delivered in 2020 in London? So I'll just give everyone a few moments to answer this. Yeah, if you want to take a guess on the Slido. So I've got lots so far. Any figures, perhaps? Just wait for some more to come through. Got 1 million, 2.6 million, 1 billion. So the answer to this is 450 million parcels were delivered in London in 2020. This is something that's only going to get worse as well. So studies are predicting that this is likely to double between now and 2030. And this number is likely to reach 1 billion parcels by 2030, or 2 parcels per Londoner per week. And currently 80% of these parcels are delivered by road, which brings with it all the problems of air pollution and congestion. So there has been a switch to electric vehicles amongst many businesses, but petrol van sales still did double in the financial year 2020 to 2021. And all of this was further accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, with up to 35% extra deliveries as a result. Where river freight comes in is that the tidal Thames provides by far the widest and most traffic-free route into central London, with links to huge delivery hubs to the east of the city, such as Dartford in Kent and Tilbury in Essex, and also to the west of the city, such as Heathrow, or many hubs to the northwest of the city, where lots of the goods from the rest of the UK may go, to be sorted and consolidated before their final destination in central London. River freight also has the potential to work with many of the other methods of reducing road traffic. So these could be things such as the consolidation of goods at hubs to reduce the number of trips taken, and also with rail freight, which was spoken about at our last Connect 4 event, which can be seen on CRP's YouTube channel if you're interested to find out more about that. So the first guide, which was published by CRP in partnership with EMSOL, is the Butler's Wharf and Dartford Vessel Pier Monitoring, which measured a boat's emissions over a 4-month period between September 2021 and January 2022. So due to time, I won't be able to go too in depth with the report, but the report provided key findings in 4 main areas. So it found that compared to Defra and new, more stringent WHO standards, boat breached the standards of nitrogen dioxide, particularly so due to lower levels of regulation on boats compared to sort of road vehicles, and particulates less so than nitrogen, but it is still a concern. As for pollution caused by river freight activity, it looked at the reasons for spikes in pollution from both the vessel. So these could be things such as higher engine speeds. So for example, anything over 18 miles per hour gives proportionally a lot more pollution and emissions, and also pier management. So that includes things like boats idling at the pier, and also provides recommendations to mitigate against this. So between the 2 locations, the report finds that emissions are higher in Dartford than Butler's Wharf, especially between 6 AM and 8 AM, which is likely to be a result of boats cold starting their engines, as well as other sort of external factors, such as a bend in the river, which reduces the pollution dispersion in Dartford. As for noise pollution, it finds that this is quite negligible. So it means that later or nighttime services could be feasible, which would avoid those pollution spikes in the morning and also wouldn't disturb people living near the piers. I'd encourage everyone to take a look at the report and the key conclusions and recommendations if you're interested in finding out more, though. The link should be in the chat. The next one is that we also commissioned a study alongside the PLA, the Thames Estuary Growth Board and Beckett Rankin to look at piers and their potential for hosting a light freight service. So the report looks at the design of piers alongside the Thames in terms of their accessibility by cargo bike and ability to load and unload cargo off boats. The report then goes on to shortlist 8 piers, which could be suitable for a light freight service, given the environmental impact of changing it and also some costings for that. And it also looks at the difference between a partial and a continual service for a light freight trail. So whilst a partial service, which is sort of one or maybe a few journeys per day, is less intrusive to the pier and also currently more economically feasible, it's very likely that a continuous service will be the future for river freight. So for more information and to read the full report, the link is also in the chat. And now I'd like to introduce the Getting Started with River Freight guide. It's a very whistle-stop tour. So this is specifically aimed at businesses of any size transporting freight into, out of or around London. So for the guide, we spoke to organisations who have a range of different functions and perspectives on the river. So these include the Port of London Authority, TfL, DHL and Livets Group, amongst others. These were the sort of main benefits and challenges which they described for groups and businesses looking to use the tidal Thames for freight. So in terms of sustainability, according to the PLA's air quality strategy for the tidal Thames, energy consumption for goods moved by waterways is about 17% that of road freight and 50% of rail transport. In a specifically London context, the amount of CO2 is greatly reduced when you compare in the emissions from road freight to river freight. The amount of particulates is less or equal. And as I sort of mentioned with the EMSOL report, nitrogen levels are still higher with boats, but trials are underway with alternative fuel methods, such as hydrotreated vegetable oils, and also Thames Clippers are doing a lot of work at the moment on zero emission methods too. In terms of reliability, the fact that the Thames is essentially traffic free means that the time deliveries arrive can be predicted with a lot greater accuracy than road traffic, because it's not affected by congestion or roadworks or any of those other external factors. There's only 2 things which can affect reliability, and those are fog and also the closure of the Thames barrier if you're coming in from the east. For a bit of context on the Thames barrier, since it opened in 1983 and the start of 2022, it has been closed 206 times. And most of these are predictable, so it's not too much of an issue and can normally be worked around. As an example, DHL's River Freight pilot, which the guide has a case study on, had a 98.5% reliability rate for goods arriving on time. In terms of access, once you're in London, the river provides really easy access to a range of infrastructure, so including cycleways and consolidation hubs, which can make deliveries faster and more convenient using last mile delivery methods such as cargo bikes or other zero emission methods. And now sort of for the challenges, in terms of cost, fixed costs can be relatively high at the moment. So an operation does need to be big enough to be able to benefit from these economies of scale. In the future, hopefully there'll be sort of more government grants for the river, and also an increase in carbon taxes for road vehicles will help to bridge that gap too. However, it does still currently cost more to deliver on the river than via more per parcel to deliver on the river than via road. So partnering with other like-minded businesses to consolidate deliveries can reduce these costs, and that's something that CRP can definitely help with. There's contacts in the guide too for CRP. In terms of complexity, for a lot of people, myself included at first, using the river for freight may at first seem quite intimidating, with lots of groups, organisations, terminology like RoRo and LoLo, which may be unfamiliar. The guide contains a section with a lot of the groups, their roles, how they interlink, as well as a glossary with useful terminology in it as well. which should hopefully be useful for businesses looking to use the Thames. So for businesses that are interested in river freight, the first considerations that you'd need to make are A, who should you speak to? So a really useful first port of call would be the PLA, a contact for which is in the guide, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction of boat operators and pier owners. So the boat operators will be able to give you advice on different sizes of boat, costs, and estimated journey times between destinations, as well. And the pier owner will be able to advise on loading and unloading the boat, as well as access to the pier from the land side and also the times that it's available. In terms of cost, the cost can vary depending on the size of the boat and other factors. But as I mentioned before, the boat operator should be able to advise before you begin the pilot. However, the more you use it, the better the cost. So consolidating deliveries and working with other businesses would really reduce this. With regards to what actually can be taken, the tidal Thames is very much set up for lighter freight at the moment. So these are things that could be rolled on and off or unloaded by hand. As most central London piers don't have cranes or any of that sort of infrastructure. And having those goods pre-sorted before getting on the boat is also helpful, as sort of sorting hubs and spaces at a premium in central London. For the last mile delivery, so for lighter and shorter deliveries, you could use walk-in freight into central London as it's so close, or cargo bikes can take up to around 300 kilograms. Larger freight may require an electric van, but pier access would need to be checked first, but obviously the pier operator can advise. So to conclude, for businesses who may be interested in beginning to use a tidal Thames for freight, I'd say there are probably three main steps. So the first one would be to take a look at the guide, which is basically a more in-depth version of what I've said today, including a case study into DHL's river freight project, which has been a really successful endeavour for them, as well as all the relevant links that Eleanor's kindly put into the chat, which have loads of extra useful information. Secondly, I would say get an idea of the goods you'd want to carry and roughly where you'd want it to go. There's pier maps in the guide and online. Nothing would need to be confirmed at that point, but it will help you with the third step, which would be to speak to CRP or the PLA, who'll be able to point you in the right direction. And that should hopefully help you to begin your journey. And finally, just a little bit more about the Coal project, which will begin in July of this year and hopefully expand river freight in London, reducing both congestion and pollution. So we're going to be working with 10 partners on this, and we're really looking forward to getting started. So that's all from me. Thanks for listening. I'll pass you back on to Rachel.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Okay, if we could get all speakers with cameras on, I'll take down the slides and we can do a few questions. So firstly, Alistair had a question from Chris Livett, Managing Director at Livett's Group. Does the river need reinventing? We need to maintain its use as a natural highway for people and freight with working wharves and piers. So perhaps it's the land that needs reinventing. What would you say to that?
That's a very interesting question. And good afternoon to Chris. I would say that given the scale of change that is coming, we just need to be acutely aware of it and flex around those traditional strengths that we've had. And I think what David's just run through around the opportunity for light freight really underlines that. So Chris is right. Yes, it's an established highway, but we're going to make more of it by responding to the public's demands for more light freight deliveries. So I think it's a question of, yes, more, but probably in a different way. There's an answer for you.
I hope you're happy with that, Chris. Ciron, will the same philanthropic funding model used previously by the Illuminated River be used to light future bridges?
Yes, it's correct. The bridges were funded philanthropically. I think the past 2 years, I should say the funders were committed to delivering the 9 bridges pandemic road, and the past 2 years led to kind of refocusing of their finances towards other cultural institutions, which is reasons why we are kind of. And I think that's rightly so. I think we're all quite aware that a significant country are struggling and have suffered for the past 2 years. So we've been advised that most of these foundations. So at the moment, we're on a kind of long pause, but that doesn't mean to say that it can't happen in the future, and we still have permission for the other side.
Perfect. Okay, good to know. So Dave, this one's from Mike Walter, editor at Transport Infrastructure News. How can we best get goods off the roads and people out of their cars and onto out of crowded trains onto the Thames? So kind of what new infrastructure would aid that modal shift to the water?
I would say in terms of goods, the general impression I got from writing this guide is that people on the river seem to be really ready for this. So there's boat operators that are ready. There's like permission will be easily granted, and there's definitely a push to do that. And there's a lot like buy-in from the PLA, there's buy-in from TfL, and there's buy-in from all of the main groups on the river. What we need now, I would say, to get that modal shift is buy-in from businesses. So we need businesses to sort of, trial these. And when we do get that, like when we do get buy-in from businesses, hopefully that will lead to these economies of scale and costs reducing on the river. And therefore, once the costs come down, then sort of freight on the river could theoretically increase exponentially from there. And yeah, sort of in terms of more infrastructure, maybe if there was able to be consolidation hubs in central London so that the sorting could be done once it arrives and have cargo bikes going off, to do the deliveries in central London, that would be an ideal next step. In terms of people, however, I would say that is sort of much more complex. So people being able to choose the river instead of a train for their commute to work might be a bit more difficult, and getting people off trains and out of cars, you could probably fill a whole extra sort of Connect 4 with. So it could be in collaboration with sort of active travel, in collaboration with sort of more frequent trains, in collaboration with extra road taxes for polluting vehicles. So yeah, but I think for goods, definitely the buy-in's there from all the groups in the river. All we need now is just buy-in from businesses.
And Alistair, quickly, while there's a message in the chat on this similar sort of topic from Kathleen, what plans are in place to carry out consultations with the residents who'd be impacted if river freight delivery is introduced to their neighbourhoods? I don't know if you had any information on that you could share with us.
So just to follow up first on what David was saying, just the missing bit in terms of passenger opportunities. The key thing for passengers is the expansion of the network, and just in the last couple of weeks we've seen that with the opening of Barking Riverside Pier. There's also a question though, as you expand that network, improving the central London hubs. But I would say travelling by river is a fantastic way to travel, and also generally more COVID safe than others. In terms of consultations, I think the first thing to note is that the majority of these light freight interventions, certainly at the moment, seem to be relatively small in scale, because you're talking about the equivalent of the stuff you would get in a van, and it will be leaving the piers normally rather than via electric vehicles at the moment, certainly by electric bikes. So the impact is relatively small. But as ever with this kind of thing, we at the PLA and operators will engage with the local communities. You heard from Chris earlier on. Chris, his Butler's Wharf base is in close contact with the local residents nearby about any changes to his operations there.
Perfect, thank you. And I see there's a few more questions. I'm really sorry that we've run out of time, but we will follow up with those tomorrow. And yeah, I guess it's all that's left to say is thank you. I will quickly put our contact details back up on the screen for you while that's loading. Here we go. Yeah, huge thank you to Alistair, Ciron and Dave for his presentations, and our contact details are on screen. And we also have our next session taking place on the 26th of May. That's meant to say at 4 p.m. same time, on kind of air pollution through technology with Pluvo and Liberty Charge, more into kind of electric charging points and different technological solutions to air pollution. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.